Hi. So my project is called The Box. Somebody was laughing at me in the elevator last night about it. Ha. So I came to New York in 1974 to be a poet. So I got this little apartment, which I sort of thought of, this is like 1974, so I thought of it as a baby loft. That was the only way I could kind of maximize my existence. And so, because I also subtitled it The Center for Minimal Living, which is part of the vibe of the time. And I had a manual typewriter, and that was like at the center of my desk. And then I would write like one poem, two poems. I was like, whoa, amazing. And eventually I got this thing which we poets called a spring binder, which is sort of like a black folder that you kind of like, you open it and you slide your poems in and you snap it shut and it's sort of like bound immediately. And so this is like a poet pride thing. And I think I had an office job and I would get all these like just labels. And so I stuck a label on my first spring binder and I called it the Haps, because it was kind of like I considered the poems like my dailies, because we all felt like we were living in a film at that time. And then eventually I made my first manuscript, and I had these older poet friends that I wanted to show it to, so I got a spring binder, and I slapped a label on that, and it said, "What do you think of Sappho's Boat?" And I gave it to them, and they were like, "It's great." So I submitted it for a grant, and I got my first grant from, what was it called? CAPS grant in 1980. And Muriel Rukeyser was the judge, and I never met her because she was dying right then, but she wrote on my manuscript, "This should be published, M.R.," which was just an amazing thing. It was how I lived at that period of time. Like every year, I would slide my best poems into a spring binder, and I would slap the year on the outside, like 76, 78. And I had a whole pile of these, and eventually I started to keep them in a box. I had so many of them. And basically the binders carried me from the moment of typewriters to the moment of computers, when we basically stopped. I mean, I know a few poets who still have binders, but most of us don't do that anymore. But there was like a meta instrument in the middle, which was called a dedicated word processor. Anybody remember? Which was so cool because you still had a typewriter, and so at a certain point after you'd compose and you'd push a button and then you'd watch your poem being typed for you on the thing, like it was like a pianola, which was sort of incredible. But I started to publish my poems in magazines at that time. I remember the first poem I ever had in a magazine was in a magazine called Personal Injury. And then I had a poem on Off Our Backs. And then later I had a poem in On Our Backs. I was like, and I can remember, and I remember there were poems that I did not put in magazines, but they were good poems, and so they were in the binders, which was in the box. And I remember some of those, like this. I remember the title of the poem was Fall in the 80s, and the poem sort of began, "Fall in the 80s was lovely. It was merely me in my 30s." And it went on, but I think that was the best part. And there was another poem that was, what was the title? It was, I think the title was Fame is Merely Advanced Sentiment. So I was very, very into merely, which is part of the largesse of the poet. And finally, the poet, during these years, I was in a workshop, and the poet Alison Otley had a workshop, and that was where a whole gang of us met. And at one point, I remember she said, for the prompt, she was like, "Write a poem from the perspective of the opposite sex." And I remember thinking, opposite what? It was like a very painful assignment, but I wrote a poem called My Boy's Red Hat, which kind of was about this dilemma. And years later, I think I was invited to be in some genderqueer trans anthology, and I wrote an essay with that title, and I wrote about the difficulty writing that poem. And so some older poet said to me, and older than me, and he said to me, "So I'd like to read that poem." And I was like, "Okay, I guess it's in my box." I pulled went under the bed to look for the box was like not under the bed where I thought it was. And I was like, "Oh, it must be in storage," because I move a lot, And so I'm gonna keep moving. So I had a really big career moment in 2015, which was my selected poems came out, and I just got like a shitload of attention, and suddenly I felt like I was not merely a poet, but I was like a rock, or like a rock star. More like a rock. And I knew part of what this meant because the thing was, I was part of the generation of poets where we most organically wrote on paper, which was like flesh. And we were starting to get an understanding as we moved towards the computer that there would be a kill for people like us. So when I had the big moment in the past year, the vultures started circling, and this archivist said, "Do you want to have a cup of coffee?" And I was like, "Yeah." And because Allen Ginsberg got $1 million for his paper. So we're all waiting for this moment. So I'm in Soho, for years people were saying, wait, you know? I was like, it's like playing chicken with your life, you know? I was like, So I'm in Soho having a cup of coffee with this guy, and Chris, and he goes, "So what do you got?" And I was like, well, I got like a lot of posters, and I got all my notebooks from age 10, I got beta tapes, I got VHS, I got 3/4 inch, I got correspondence. And I told him about the box, because I actually I figured, you know. And he was like, "Well, where do you think it is?" I said, "Well, I have 2 storage units, one in New York and one in San Diego, because I taught there for 5 years." And he was like, "You got to find it." He said, "In our business, we call a box like that the gusher." I was like, whoa, you know? So I go to San Diego, and it's not there. And I was like, oh, fuck. So I start making a list. Like, I lived certainly from 2008 to 2015, when this was, I had lived in about 22 places. I move a lot, you know. And so I started calling people on this list, and I even got psychics, and they're all like, "You're very close, you know. But everybody I called, like I lived in Los Angeles for a while, and I called that person, and they'd sold a house, but there was a comedy writer, she still knew his phone number, and I called him, and then somebody else. So I was just like, I was in all these rooms and all these, you know, like worlds. And I really moved a lot. Like I've lived in Ireland, I lived in Italy. The box didn't always go, but it went a lot because I was putting together my selected poems. So there might be some secret poems in the box that I didn't, you know, like I lived in Cape Cod, I lived in Missoula. In fact, Missoula, I taught there for a semester, and so I drove back with my girlfriend in my truck. And we got to the East Village, and she lived on 10th Street, and we unpacked the truck, and I'm not sure if this is true, but like maybe it's possible that I left the box in the truck, I don't know, because it was very heavy, you know, and I was like, who would steal this, you know? So it was like I don't mean the cab of the truck, I don't mean the bed of the truck, I mean the cab. So it's sort of like, that's possible. So sometimes what I imagine is that, you know, like people used to sleep in my truck in the East Village, you know, and you'd kind of come in the morning and the truck smells kind of funny. But so sometimes I think that possibly somebody might have come into the truck in the middle of the night and, you know, took the box out, put it on the sidewalk, put in their big blue backpack, put it in the bed, you know, and slept. And then at dawn, they wake up because they don't want, you know, they set their cell phone because they don't want the person to come in who's doing alternate parking. And so they leave, and then in the morning, somebody looks at the box and goes, and takes it into their apartment. The point is, I don't know where the box is. So I really am that poet. In 1990, I was dating a Super 8 filmmaker. And I think just before we got involved, she lived on 14th Street, and she got robbed, and they took all of her film equipment. And I remember saying sort of joyously, I think I even said this in bed, I was like, "Ha, you should become a poet. We don't need anything." So last year, I meet this self-described Jewish television writer. In fact, I met her on stage we were in some panel discussion in San Francisco. We fall in love. I don't know why this is the big moment. I'm taking up my minutes. Okay, I meet her. We fall in love. God, what is it? What is that I'm trying to... Anyway, we fall in love. there's something I want to know there, and I can't remember what the hell it is. Okay, we fall in love, and I tell her about the box. And she says, are you going to write about it? And I was like, well, you know, and she goes, well, if you don't write about it, I'm going to put it in season. Oh, I know. I meet her, I fall in love. I didn't know I was already on her show as a poet character, right? Small detail, you know, very, very, very popular detail. So I tell her the box. She says, are you going to write about it? And I was like, well, I don't know. And she goes, well, if you don't write about it, I'm going to put it in season 3. And I was like, whoa. So here's my project, my creative capital project is called my travels. So my idea is to put all my travels in the box and basically write a TV show about a poet who's lost something. And so it takes you through all her lives and all her connections, and she's searching for it. And meanwhile, she's still, I mean, like for instance, one of my essays in my book, and I'm writing the book as well. I'm going to write an essay called The Box too. But I actually did a street retreat with a bunch of Buddhists, and we lived on the streets of New York. And so when I think about the TV show, I think like the poet could be sitting next to the person who took the box. You know, because in this retreat, we would go and we would live and we would eat with the homeless in all the places where the homeless live, and to witness homelessness in New York. So it's like the poet could actually be sitting next to the person who slept in her truck and put it out in the street, if that's what happens. So this is basically my pitch is The Box, a television show about poets, and about a poet, and there'll be a poem. My plan is to have a poem be in every episode, so that we're endlessly distributing poetry in America. And I think, weirdly, the confluence of television and poetry has seemed wildly popular. It's the most famous thing I ever did. And so I think it's time to flip literature's loss into television and make the opposite joke. So what I want is about 3 things. I want enthusiasm. I want to know that this is a great idea. Yeah, thank you. And I have already written, I mean, weirdly, somebody asked me to write a pilot, and I've already written a pilot, so I'd like to show it to people. I'm so afraid, I haven't even read it. I was like, I had to do it in 2 days for some kind of deadline. And so I want to show people, I want to have people to show the pilot to, and obviously I'm looking for a producer. So that's my deal. Thank you.